Hello friends, I am Dr. Vikas Agrawal, Faculty of Law at School of Law Dr. Hari Singh Gaur Vishwavidyalaya Sagar, Madhya Pradesh. Today's topic of our discussion and learning is all about offenses affecting human body. But before I move ahead to the introduction of this discussion, let me introduce you about what we are going to learn today. Today's lecture is divided into the following modules. First module is about introduction, second, offenses affecting human life, third, offense of causing hurt, fourth, offense of wrongful restraint and wrongful confinement, fifth, offense of kidnapping and abduction, sixth, offense of rape, and the last one is about conclusion. Chapter 16th of the Indian Penal Code 1860, that is beginning from section 299 to section 377, deals with the offenses affecting human body. This chapter covers every aspect of human life. For instance, it aims to protect the right to life and personal liberty, security of person, freedom of movement and enjoyment of one's person against intentional invasion by others. The various important sections given under this chapter can be broadly categorized under the following heads: offense affecting human life, offense of causing hurt, offense of wrongful restraint and wrongful confinement, offense of kidnapping and abduction, offense of rape. Now, we will discuss these different categories of offenses in detail one by one. The first offense affecting human life is the offense of culpable homicide, that is given in section 299. Homicide means the killing of a human being by a human being. However, in all the cases, the killing of a human being is not punishable, as the homicide can be divided into two parts, that is lawful homicide and unlawful homicide. And it is only unlawful homicide or culpable homicide which is made punishable under the Indian Penal Code, but not the lawful homicide. As for example, killing in the exercise of right of private defense or under the lawful authority. The unlawful or culpable homicide can be divided further into culpable homicide not amounting to murder and culpable homicide amounting to murder. If it does not amount to murder, then it is punishable as the offense of culpable homicide, and in the other case, it is punishable as the offense of murder. We can say that murder is only a species of culpable homicide. It is only a particular form of culpable homicide. In the other words, it can also be said that every murder is culpable homicide, but every culpable homicide is not murder. If the culpable homicide is committed in any of the circumstances mentioned in clauses 1 to 4 of section 300, then it will amount to murder. The offense of culpable homicide is defined under section 299 in the following words, that is, whoever causes death by doing an act with the intention of causing death or with the intention of causing such bodily injury as is likely to cause death, or with the knowledge that he is likely by such act to cause death, commits the offense of culpable homicide. Thus, in order to attract section 299, following essentials are required, that is, first one, causing of death of a human being. Causing of death means the death of a human being. It does not include the causing of death of an unborn child in the mother's womb. However, in this regard, explanation 3rd to section 299 provides that the causing of death of a child in the mother's womb is not homicide, but it may amount to culpable homicide to cause the death of a living child if any part of that child has been brought forth, though the child may not have taken breath or have not been completely born. Second, death is caused by doing an act. The death must be the result of the act of the accused. There must be direct connection between the act of the accused and the death of the victim. However, death need not to be immediate, but there should not be any doubt regarding the cause of the death. In the case of Moti Singh vs. State of UP, the deceased Gaya Charan received 2 gunshot wounds in the abdomen, which were dangerous to life. The injury was received on 9th February 1960. Treatment was given to him and he was discharged from the hospital. He, however, died on 1st March 1960. His body was cremated without any post-mortem being done. It was observed by the court that in order to prove the charge of Gaya Charan's murder, it was necessary to establish that he had died on account of the injury received by him. Since there was no evidence to establish the cause of the death, the accused could not be said to have caused the death of Gaya Charan. The connection between the primary act and the death should not be too remote. Next essential is intentional act. In order to attract section 299, the act is done by the accused first with the intention of causing death, second with the intention of causing such bodily injury as is likely to cause death, or third with the knowledge that by such act he is likely to cause death. First one, intention to cause death. Intention means the expectation of the consequence in question. Intention is inferred from the act of the accused and circumstances of the case. Intention also includes the foresight of the certainty. A consequence is deemed to be intended when it is foreseeable. Second one is with the intention of causing such bodily injury as is likely to cause death. It will be sufficient if the accused intended to cause such bodily injury which was likely to cause death. There may be more than one consequences of that injury and death is one of those consequences. In case of culpable homicide, there is a lower degree of intention. There is possibility that death may be caused. The third point is with the knowledge that he is likely by such act to cause death. Knowledge means consciousness or awareness about the consequences. Means knowledge is a strong word and imports a certainty and not merely a possibility. In Kitabdi Mandal's case, the accused kicked his wife, aged about 9 years, on her back with his bare feet. Consequently, she fell down on the ground. It produced rupture of her abdomen and died immediately. The accused was held liable for causing culpable homicide because a kick to a girl of tender age with such a force as to produce the rupture of the abdomen is an act of such a character that no reasonable man could be ignorant of the likelihood of its causing death. The next point for the discussion is death caused without intention or knowledge. If the death is caused in the absence of any intention or knowledge, then it may amount to grievous hurt or simple hurt, but it will not amount to culpable homicide. In the case of Emperor versus Chaturnath, A and C were fighting in a dark night. A aimed a blow at the head of C, and in the meantime C's wife, who had a child on her shoulder, intervened between them. The blow missed the aim and fell on the head of the child, and the child died. It was held by the court that inasmuch as the blow, if it had fallen upon the complainant, would have caused simple hurt, the accused was guilty of simple hurt. The next offence affecting body is the offence of murder, that is given in section 300. Murder is an aggravated form of culpable homicide. In case of murder, there is a high degree of intention or knowledge. Culpable homicide is murder if the act by which the death is caused falls within any of the 4 clauses mentioned in section 300. Therefore, an offence cannot amount to murder unless it falls within the definition of culpable homicide. That's why it is said that every murder is culpable homicide, but every culpable homicide is not murder. Now we will discuss the different clauses of section 300. First clause, act is done with the intention of causing death. Intention is gathered from the act of the accused and the facts and circumstances of the case. If a person causes death of a human being with the intention of causing death, it would amount to murder. In R. Venkalu versus State of Hyderabad, the accused person locked the single room hut in which the deceased was sleeping from outside, poured kerosene oil over the hut and then set it on fire. The villagers who tried to rescue the person from the burning hut were driven away by the accused person with the use of lathis. The court held that it was clear from the facts and evidence that accused intended to kill the deceased, and so they were held liable for the offence of murder. The second clause is with the intention of causing such bodily injury as the offender knows to be likely to cause death. This clause talks about not only the intention but the knowledge that the injury is likely to cause death. In this clause, there is a higher degree of determination to cause death. offender knows that the bodily injury intended to be inflicted is likely to cause death. This clause applies to those special cases where the person injured is in such a condition or state of health that his death would be likely to be caused by an injury which would not ordinarily cause the death of a person in sound health, and where the person inflicting the injury knows that owing to such condition or state of health, he is likely to cause the death of the person injured. For example, a blow by a lathi on the head of a child or on the head of an old person, a blow in the stomach where the victim is suffering from a disease of the stomach. Third clause is injury sufficient in the ordinary course of nature to cause death. For the application of this clause, two things are required. Firstly, that the injury was intentional, and secondly, that the injury inflicted was sufficient in the ordinary course of nature to cause death. Under this clause, the emphasis is on the sufficiency of the injury. Whether the injury is sufficient in the ordinary course of nature or not depends on many considerations, such as nature of the weapon used, part of the body, force used in causing the injury, etc. The word bodily injury sufficient in the ordinary course of nature to cause death means the death would be the most probable result of such injury, and ordinarily it would be highly unlikely for any person to survive an injury of such a nature. In this clause, there is no subjective knowledge of the accused, but it is applied from an objective point of view. It means it is not the personal knowledge of the accused that matters, but whether objectively speaking in real terms the injury intentionally caused is sufficient to cause death. In the case of Virsa Singh versus State of Punjab, the accused Virsa Singh thrust a spear in the abdomen of Khem Singh, the deceased, with such a force that his bowels were ruptured and the intestine was cut from 3 places, from which the digested food oozed out. According to the doctor, the injury was sufficient in the ordinary course of nature to cause death. It was held by the Supreme Court that, in the absence of any circumstances to show that the injury was caused accidentally or unintentionally, it had to be presumed that the accused had intended to cause the inflicted injury. Clause 4th. Doing of an act which is imminently dangerous. Under the 4th clause of section 300, the accused does an act which is so imminently dangerous that it must in all probability result in the death of a human being, and the accused does not have any reasonable excuse for indulging in such an extremely dangerous act. The excuse must be reasonable, though not necessarily legal. Merely causing death by doing an act with the knowledge that it is so imminently dangerous that it must in all probability cause death is not murder. It is the lack of reasonable excuse for such an act that makes it punishable as the offence of murder. In Emperor versus Dhirajiya, a lady who was running away from her abusive husband panicked when she saw her husband following her at a close distance. She jumped into a well along with her 6-month-old baby in her arms, leading to the child's death, whereas she herself was saved. The court held that jumping into a well with a child of tender years was an extremely dangerous act, posing grave risk to his life. But since the lady had an excuse, she was not held guilty for the offence of murder, but only for the offence of culpable homicide not amounting to murder. Now we will come to exceptions to section 300. There are 5 exceptions to section 300, and the burden of proof to prove these exceptions lies on the accused person. If it is proved that the case is covered under any of the exceptions, then the accused will not be held liable for the offence of murder, but only for the offence of culpable homicide not amounting to murder. The first exception is death caused by an act done under the influence of grave and sudden provocation. When one person is provoked by another person, and in response to that provocation, if the death is caused, then it comes under first exception. There is a distinction between intentional killing in hot blood and intentional killing when the blood is cooled down. The former is a killing in provocation and is considered to be a less heinous kind of homicide than the later one by a man who is in possession of his self-control. For the application of this exception, following essentials are required. First, there must be provocation. Provocation must be grave and sudden. Third, by the reason of such grave and sudden provocation, the offender must have been deprived of the power of self-control. Fourth, the death of a person who gave the provocation or of any other person by mistake or accident must have been caused. In the famous case of K.M. Nanavati versus State of Maharashtra, the accused K.M. Nanavati was a naval officer. One day his wife Salvia confessed to him that she had illicit intimacy with deceased Prem Ahuja. Enraged at this, the accused went to his ship, took from the store a revolver and 6 cartridges on a false pretext, went to the flat of the deceased, entered in the bedroom and shot him dead after a heated exchange of words. During the trial, he sought partial exemption from the criminal liability on account of grave and sudden provocation. The court held that the test to be applied is that of the effect of the provocation on a reasonable man, and in applying that test, it is of particular importance to consider whether a sufficient interval has elapsed since the receiving of the information which caused the provocation to allow a reasonable man to cool down. In this case, the court held that the accused Nanavati guilty for the offence of murder, as sufficient time has elapsed between the provocation, that is the acceptance of illicit relation by Nanavati's wife, and the death of the Ahuja. Come to exception second, that is death caused by an act done in the excess of the right of private defence. When the limits of right of private defence are exceeded in good faith and without any intention, and the death is caused, then it amounts to the offence of culpable homicide not amounting to murder. For example, Z attempts to worship A not in such a manner as to cause grievous hurt to A. A draws out a pistol. Z persists in the assault. A, believing in good faith that he cannot by other means prevent himself from being worshipped, shoots Z dead. A has not committed murder but only the offence of culpable homicide. Exception third is death caused by a public servant exceeding the powers conferred on him. When the act is done by a public servant or by some other person acting in the aid of such public servant, and the public servant or such other person, while acting for the advancement of public justice, exceeds the power given to him by law in good faith for the due discharge of his duties and without any ill will or malice, and the death is caused, then it will amount to culpable homicide not amounting to murder. Fourth exception is death caused in sudden fight. If the death is caused in sudden fight, then it will amount to the offence of culpable homicide not amounting to murder. Fight should be sudden, means it should be without any premeditation. It must not be prearranged. It should occur in a heat of passion. It is immaterial as to which party offered the provocation or which party committed the first assault. It is something more than hot talking. Sudden fight implies exchange of blows from each side. It can also be said that sudden fight includes something in the nature of free fight. Free fight takes place when both the sides mean to fight actually. It must also be satisfied that assailant had not taken any undue advantage or acted in a cruel manner. The last exception is death caused with the consent. If a person above 18 years of age voluntarily consents to undertake the risk of the death at the hands of another person, then the one who causes death in compliance with the wishes of the deceased will be held liable only for culpable homicide and not for murder. The consent must be free and voluntarily given. It must not be given under fear or misconception of facts. This clause is invoked to seek the partial exemption from criminal liability in cases of mercy killing, as the euthanasia is illegal in India. The next offence affecting body is the offence of dowry death, that is given in section 304b. Section 304b defines the offence of dowry death in the following words: where the death of a woman is caused by any burns or bodily injury or occurs otherwise than under normal circumstances within 7 years of her marriage, and it is shown that soon before her death she was subjected to cruelty or harassment by husband or any relative of her husband for or in connection with any demand for dowry, such death shall be called dowry death, and such husband or relative shall be deemed to have caused the dowry death. Subsection 2 of section 304b provides that the offence of dowry death is punishable with imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 7 years, but which may extend to imprisonment for life. The essentials of dowry death are as following. First one, death of a woman. The first essential of this offence is the death of a woman. Either it may be in the form of killing of a woman or the woman commits suicide. The second is death to be non-natural. The second requirement for the application of this section is that the death should not be natural or accidental death. It must occur in some non-natural circumstances such as due to burning, bodily injury, hanging, etc. The third element is death occurs within 7 years of her marriage. The death of the woman must have occurred within 7 years of her marriage. If the death occurs after 7 years, then the case may come under section 306, that is abetment to commit suicide. The fourth element is the woman must have been subjected to cruelty or harassment by her husband or any relative of her husband. The meaning given to the word cruelty in section 498A is applicable to section 304B also. Explanation to section 498A provides that the cruelty means any willful conduct which is of such a nature as is likely to drive the woman to commit suicide or to cause grievous injury or danger to life, limb or health, whether mental or physical, of any woman, or harassment of the woman, where such harassment is with a view to coercing her or any person related to her to meet any unlawful demand for any property or valuable security, or is on account of failure by her or any person related to her to meet such demand. The next essential is such cruelty or harassment should be for or in connection with demand for dowry. The next essential is such cruelty or harassment should be shown to have been meted out to the woman soon before her death. The words soon before her death means that there must be close proximity between the effect of cruelty and the occurrence of death. The time interval between the two must not be too much. The another point for the discussion is presumption as to dowry death. Section 113B of the Indian Evidence Act provides that if it is shown that soon before the death of a woman, such woman has been subjected to cruelty or harassment for or in connection with any demand of dowry, the court shall presume that her husband or relatives have caused the dowry death under section 304B of the Indian Penal Code. Section 319 to section 338 deal with various forms of hurts. This chapter of hurt is divided into two parts, that is hurt, which we can call simple hurt, and the other one is grievous hurt. We will discuss the definitions for these two types of hurt one by one along with the punishment provided for them. First one, hurt, that is given in section 319. The term hurt is defined in section 319 in the following words: whoever causes bodily pain, disease or infirmity to any person is said to cause hurt. The definition of hurt includes three things. First one, bodily pain, causing of bodily harm except so slight a harm of which no person of ordinary prudence would complain of is covered under the definition of hurt. It is not necessary that any visible injury should be caused on the victim. All that the section contemplates is the causing of bodily pain. Some of the examples of causing hurt are pulling a woman by hair, slapping anybody, and pulling or pushing a person forcefully. The second category of hurt is disease. The communication of disease by one person to another person is covered in the definition of hurt. Third one is infirmity. Causing of bodily infirmity is also covered in the definition of hurt. Infirmity means the inability of an organ of the body to perform its normal functions. It also includes unsound or unhealthy state of body or mind. Punishment for causing hurt is given under section 323. Section 323 provides that whoever voluntarily causes hurt shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine which may extend to 1000 rupees, or with both. Section 324 provides that whoever voluntarily causes hurt by means of any dangerous weapon shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 3 years, or with fine, or with both. The second category of hurt is grievous hurt, that is given in section 320. Grievous hurt is a more serious kind of hurt. It must be of any of the kinds mentioned in section 320. Section 320 provides that following kinds of hurt are treated to be grievous hurt. The first one, emasculation. Emasculation means depriving a person of the masculine power. This clause is applicable to males only. The second is permanent privation of the sight of either eye. Injury which permanently deprives a person of the eyesight of either of the eyes or of both the eyes. The third is permanent privation of hearing of either ear, that is causing permanent deafness. The fourth is privation of any member or joint. Deprivation of any limb or organ of the body or joint, making a person permanently crippled for lifetime. The fifth is destruction or permanent impairing of the power of any member or joint. Limb or joint are the essential part of the body that helps in the discharge of normal functions. That is why the destruction or permanent impairing of the powers of any member or joint is also a grievous hurt. The sixth is permanent disfiguration of the head or face. It detracts a person from his personal appearance but does not weaken him. For example, cutting a person's nose or making a permanent mark on the cheek of a girl. The seventh is fracture or dislocation of bone or tooth. It causes a great pain to the person injured. That is why this is also included in the definition of grievous hurt. Eighth is any hurt which endangers life or which causes the sufferer to be during the space of 20 days in severe bodily pain or unable to follow his ordinary pursuits. Punishment for the offence of causing grievous hurt is given in section 325. It provides that whoever voluntarily causes grievous hurt shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 7 years and shall also be liable to fine. Section 326 provides that whoever voluntarily causes grievous hurt by means of dangerous weapon shall be punished with imprisonment for life or with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. Section 326A, which was recently inserted by the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, provides that whoever voluntarily causes grievous hurt by throwing acid or administering acid shall be punished with imprisonment which shall not be less than 10 years, but which may extend to imprisonment for life and with fine also, provided that such fine shall be just and reasonable to meet the medical expenses of the victim, provided also that any fine imposed under this section shall be given to the victim. These are the offences by which the personal liberty and the right to movement of a person is curtailed, and this unlawful curtailment is made punishable under the Indian Penal Code. Now we will discuss the offence of wrongful restraint. The offence of wrongful restraint is defined under section 339 of the Indian Penal Code, which provides as follows: whoever voluntarily obstructs any person so as to prevent that person from proceeding in any particular direction in which that person has a right to proceed is said wrongfully to restrain that person. To constitute this offence, following essentials are required. First one, voluntary obstruction of a person. Second, the obstruction prevents that person from proceeding in any particular direction. The person obstructed has every right to proceed in that particular direction. The obstruction may be caused by the use of physical force as well as by the use of threats. The offence of wrongful restraint is a partial restraint of the personal liberty of a person, as the person is prevented from proceeding in a particular direction, but he can move to all the other directions. But there is an exception to this offence, that is the obstruction of a private way over land or water, which a person in good faith believes himself to have a lawful right to obstruct, is not an offence within the meaning of section 339. The offence of wrongful restraint is punishable under section 341 with simple imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 month, or with fine which may extend to 500 rupees, or with both. Now we will discuss the offence of wrongful confinement. The offence of wrongful confinement is defined under section 340 of the IPC, which provides, whoever wrongfully restrains any person in such a manner as to prevent that person from proceeding beyond certain circumscribing limit is said wrongfully to confine that person. This offence is a complete restraint of personal liberty of a person, as in this offence a person is wrongfully prevented from proceeding beyond certain circumscribed limit. He is kept within the limits out of which he wishes to go and has a right to go. For example, locking up a man in a room or tying him up with a tree, etc. The offence of wrongful confinement is punishable under section 342 with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine which may extend to 1000 rupees, or with both. The offence of kidnapping. The literal meaning of the term kidnapping is the stealing of a child. Under the system of common law, kidnapping means taking away a person from his own country to another country. Section 359 includes both these kinds of kidnapping. It provides that kidnapping is of two kinds: kidnapping from India and kidnapping from lawful guardianship. Kidnapping from India is given under section 360. Section 360 provides that whoever conveys any person beyond the limits of India without the consent of that person or of some person legally authorized to consent on behalf of the person is said to kidnap that person from India. Under this section, the victim may be male or female of any age, whether minor or major. The next one is kidnapping from lawful guardianship. Section 361 defines kidnapping from lawful guardianship. It provides, whoever takes or entices any minor under the age of 16 years if a male, or under the age of 18 years if a female, or any person of unsound mind out of the keeping of lawful guardianship of such minor or person of unsound mind without the consent of such guardian is said to kidnap such minor or person from the lawful guardianship. To constitute this offence, following essentials are required. First one, taking or enticing away a minor or a person of unsound mind. Second, such minor must be under the age of 16 years if a male, or under the age of 18 years if a female. For persons of unsound mind, there is no age limit. The third one, the taking or enticing away must be out of the keeping of the lawful guardian. Fourth, the taking or enticing must be without the consent of such guardian. The consent of the minor or the person of unsound mind who is kidnapped is wholly immaterial. Minors and persons of unsound mind are presumed to be of immature understanding, thereby needing the care and protection of a guardian. The objective of this provision is to protect such persons from being exploited for any illegal or immoral purpose. This is the primary reason for making kidnapping a strict liability offence, that is, the accused would be held liable irrespective of his intention. Thus, if a minor is enticed, allured, persuaded or induced in any manner which causes the minor to go with the kidnapper, this would amount to constructive taking. The next offence is the offence of abduction. Under section 362 of the Indian Penal Code, abduction is committed when a person compels someone by the use of force or deceitful means and induces that person to go from any place. In abduction, there should be some active suggestion on the part of the accused person which causes the person abducted to go to some place where he would not have otherwise gone. The main difference between the offence of kidnapping and abduction is kidnapping can be committed only in respect of minors or a person of unsound mind under the lawful guardianship, while the abduction can be committed against any person. Any person of any age can be abducted. Recently, after the Nirbhaya case in Delhi, the law relating to offence of rape has been broadly amended by the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013. The amended section 375 of the IPC provides that a man is said to commit rape if he penetrates his penis into the vagina, mouth, urethra or anus of a woman or makes her to do so with him or any other person. Second, inserts any other object or a part of the body into the vagina, urethra or anus of a woman or makes her to do so with him or any other person. The next is manipulates any part of the body of woman so as to cause penetration into the vagina, urethra, anus or any part of the body of such woman or makes her to do so with him or any other person. And the last one, applies his mouth to the vagina, anus, urethra of a woman or makes her to do so with him or any other person under the circumstances falling under any of the following clauses. First one, against her will. Second, without her consent. Third, with her consent when her consent has been obtained by putting her or any person in whom she is interested in fear of death or of hurt. Fourth, with her consent when the man knows that he is not her husband and that her consent is given because she believes that he is another man to whom she is or believes herself to be lawfully married. Fifth, with her consent when at the time of giving such consent by reason of unsoundness of mind or intoxication she is unable to understand the nature and consequences of that to which she gives consent. Sixth, with or without her consent when she is under the age of 18 years. Seventh, when she is unable to communicate the consent. However, sexual intercourse or sexual act by a man with his own wife, the wife not being under the age of 15 years is not rape. Now we will come to the punishment for the offence of rape. Section 376 provides punishment for the offence of rape. It provides as follows. Subsection 1. Whoever commits rape shall be punished with rigorous imprisonment of either description for a term which shall not be less than 7 years but which may extend to imprisonment for life and shall also be liable to fine. Subsection 2 talks about punishment for aggravated form of rape. It provides that whoever being a police officer commits rape within the limits of the police station to which such police officer is appointed or in the premises of any station house or on a woman in such police officer's custody. Second, being a public servant commits rape on a woman in such public servant's custody or next, being a member of the armed force deployed in an area commits rape in such area or being on the management or on the staff of a jail commits rape on any prisoner of such jail or being on the management or on the staff of a hospital commits rape on a woman in that hospital or being a relative, guardian or teacher of a woman commits rape on such woman or commits rape during the communal violence or commits rape on a woman knowing her to be pregnant or commits rape on a woman when she is under the age of 16 years, or commits rape on a woman incapable of giving consent, or being in a position of control or dominance over a woman commits rape of such woman, or commits rape of a woman suffering from mental or physical disability, or while committing rape causes grievous bodily harm or disfigures or endangers the life of a woman, or commits rape repeatedly on the same woman, then these categories of persons shall be punished with rigorous imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 10 years, but which may extend to imprisonment for life, which shall mean imprisonment for the remainder of that person's natural life, and shall also be liable to fine. Apart from this, there are some other important provisions in relation to the offence of rape which were recently inserted by the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, that is section 376A, section 376D and section 376E, which need to be mentioned here. Section 376A provides that whoever commits an offence punishable under subsection 1 or subsection 2 of section 376 and in the course of commission inflicts an injury which causes the death of the woman or causes the woman to be in a persistent vegetative state shall be punished with rigorous imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 20 years, but which may extend to imprisonment for life, which shall mean imprisonment for the remainder of that person's natural life or with death. Section 376D provides the punishment for the offence of gang rape. It provides that where a woman is raped by one or more persons constituting a group or acting in furtherance of common intention, each of those persons shall be deemed to have committed the offence of rape and shall be punished with rigorous imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 20 years, but which may extend to imprisonment for life, which shall mean imprisonment for the remainder of that person's natural life and with fine. Section 376E provides that whoever has been previously convicted of an offence punishable under section 376 or section 376A or section 376D and is subsequently convicted of an offence punishable under any of the said sections shall be punished with imprisonment for life, which shall mean imprisonment for the remainder of that person's natural life or with death. At the last, we can say that Indian Penal Code 1860 is an important legislation, chapter 16th of which deals with the offences against body. It defines the various offences against body such as culpable homicide, murder, hurt, grievous hurt, wrongful restraint, wrongful confinement, kidnapping, abduction and the offence of rape. It talks about the essential elements of all these offences which are required to be proved by the prosecution to prove the guilt of the accused. And at the last, it also provides the punishment for the commission of these offences. With all this information, here we come to the end of today's lecture. Do keep in mind what we have discussed today. It's time for you all to do some self-study. This is Dr. Vikas Agrawal signing off. If you want to learn more and enhance your knowledge, you may log on to our website for MCQs, quizzes and LORs, that is www.cec.nic.in. Till then, goodbye.